Hello and welcome to the sideboard here at the StarCityGames.com Players Championship 2016 edition. I'm Nick Miller alongside Andrew Tenjum, Team Card Hoarder member. You locked up your invite very early on. Season 1, you kind of just did a super consistent job, qualified for the Players Championship. You've had a lot of time to think about this tournament. What's kind of been going through your mind as you've been preparing for this event?
Yeah, I was very fortunate to go on a run in Season 1 and qualify early, and then ever since, the Players' Championship was what's on my mind. I've been thinking about it all year, really.
Okay, we're going to be talking about your standard deck because you've been one of the architects behind a lot of the card hoarder decks that have been taking over the Opens. We're going to talk about your Jeskai Midrange deck, which was, we saw a preview of in Knoxville when you played a red-white version of the deck. Now you've added blue, and you're kind of this really strange looking mid-range angel deck almost.
Yeah, it's a really interesting deck. I did pretty well with the deck in Knoxville. I got 10th place, and since then I've made some adjustments, notably adding a color in blue. But I think it matches up really well against the metagame right now.
Okay, we're going to dive into the deck here. You've got cards all across the spectrum from 1 to 7. Let's start off, Thraben Inspector, Veteran Motorist, Reflector Mage. These are kind of your creature early game stuff here.
Yeah, some people have described this deck as a mixture of blue-white flash and red-white vehicles, which is somewhat accurate. But yeah, these creatures are just great early game plays. Veteran Motorist is especially good in this deck because of its scry ability, which helps me filter through my more clunky draws and helps me hit land drops and such. And then also, of course, it goes well with the vehicles, which we'll see later.
Okay. Now, Reflector Mage, this was a card you didn't have access to in Knoxville because you weren't playing blue, but you now have a bunch of blue sideboard cards, which now kind of enables you to play Reflector Mage now that you have blue in your deck.
Exactly. In Knoxville, I actually played Fairgrounds Warden in this slot, which is just objectively a much worse Magic card. So now that I'm playing blue, I get a nice upgrade to Reflector Mage, which we all know the power of how good Reflector Mage is.
Continue on here, looking at the rest of your cards. Now, this is kind of where your mid-range, late-game stuff happens. Thalia's Lancer, we saw this package very early on in the format, but now you get to bring it here in this deck. Bruna and Gisela, late-game combo here.
Yeah, I think this is the core that I think holds the deck together. I make Bracella almost in half my games, I would say, and that's really helped out by Thalia's Lancers especially, which can tutor either of these cards. And the other thing that helps make the combo is Nahiri, which we'll see in a couple slides. And it has a lot of utility of being able to discard Giselle early with either the Nahiri or the Smuggler's Copter. And then later in the game, I can tutor up a Bruna with Thalia's Lancers and make a Bracella on the spot. So That's pretty powerful.
Not a lot of decks being able to beat Bracella. So Continue on here, look at your vehicles. This is kind of your vehicle hybrid package. Smuggler's Copter is just one of the best cards in the format, and the Sky Shift here as well, which is tutorable with the Thalia's Lancer.
Yep, Smuggler's Copter is obviously just a very powerful card, and it plays an important role in this deck of being able to filter through my more clunky draws as well as attack Planeswalkers, because I'm not quite as aggressive as the Blue-White Flash or the Red-White Vehicles decks. And then Sky Sovereign, just one of the most powerful cards in certain matchups, such as Blue-White Flash. And like you mentioned, it's tutorable by Thalia's Lancers, so that's a really cool interaction.
And of course, we're a white deck, so we're playing Gideon, one of the best cards in the format, one of the best Planeswalkers if you talk to some people of all time. So.
Yep, not much needs to be said about Gideon. It's just one of the best cards in the format.
All right, so we'll continue on here. This is kind of your removal package and your Planeswalker package here with Nahiri, Stasis Snare, and Harness Lightning. You have a lot of answers to most problems and permanents.
Yep, I mentioned Nahiri a little bit before and its synergies with the Angel package, but it's also very good at killing problematic permanents, not only creatures, but also things like Stasis Snare, and sometimes even Aetherworks Marvel if it's tapped. And then Stasis Snare and Harness Lightning, of course, I need some removal spells, and I think these are the best ones in these colors.
Okay, we'll take a look at the mana here. You're a 3-color deck. You get to play all the fast lands between Spirebluff Canals and Inspiring Vantage, then your dual land here, Prayer Stream. Your mana looks very good in this deck.
Yep, the mana is very smooth for a 3-color deck, and I think it just has a good mix of lands that come into play untapped early, such as the fast lands, and also lands that come into play untapped later, such as Prairie Stream.
Then we'll get to see Evolving Wilds and your basic lands, forest, plains, or mountains, plains, and 1 island here with your evolving wilds.
Yeah.
We'll move into the sideboard because this is kind of what the blue splash was all about originally. Ceremonious Rejection, the top card here.
Yeah, with the red-white version was very good against blue-white flash, red-white or Mardu vehicles, as well as green-black delirium. But I really struggled with the Aetherworks Marvel matchup, and since then, that deck has just become so popular. So I needed to do something to combat it, and Ceremonious Rejection was the answer. It's just so powerful having a 1-mana counterspell for not only the card Aetherworks Marvel, but also things like Emrakul.
Yeah. Speaking of 1 mana, you have a bunch more options here at 1 mana. 4 Galvanic Bombardment and Fragmentize here. You're really overloading on the 1 mana spells, so you can play multiple spells per turn.
Exactly. Yeah, I think 1 mana interaction is very important in this format. Galvanic Bombardment is excellent against this smaller creature decks, such as Mardu vehicles. And then Fragmentize, this is an artifact format, so being able to kill artifacts and enchantments for 1 mana is just very powerful.
Yep, that's where you want to be. Next slide, we'll get to see the rest of your sideboard. You got yourself an extra Gideon, a Linvala, which is of course tutorable with Thalia's Lancers, and then Fumigate, which it looks like it kind of can turn into this control deck post-board with all the removal, counter spells, and the Wraths.
Yeah, one of the interesting dynamics of the Players' Championship is that for a lot of the rounds, we're going to have access to deck lists. So when my opponent sees my sideboard and they see Fumigates, I think that they're going to be a little uncertain of how they should sideboard against me because they don't know what role I'm going to take in these post-board games. And to be honest, I don't really know that either until I go to sideboarding. Sideboarding is very fluid with this deck, and I can go anywhere on the spectrum to very aggressive to very controlling. And Fumigate is also a concession to Ishkana, which is one of the most powerful cards in the format, and honestly, there's not a lot of great answers to it outside of Fumigate in the format.
Yeah, and that's one thing Brad Nelson mentioned, a veteran of the Players' Championship. He said, when deck lists are public throughout the entire tournament, you really can kind of tune your deck to make people have to make decisions when boarding, when trying to play around all the cards. By just having the presence of Fumigate in your deck, you put the pressure on them. How do they need to sideboard?
Exactly, yeah. This is not the type of deck that you can just use a sideboarding guide to sideboard with. There's just a lot of fluid decisions. I bring in Fumigate in pretty much every matchup sometimes, but I also don't bring it in every matchup. A lot of times it just depends on how I think they're going to sideboard and how aggressive they're being.
60% of the time it works every time.
Exactly.
All right, so what do you think the format's going to look like for the Players' Championship in the standard metagame?
I actually expected a good mix of everything between Mardu vehicles, blue-white flash, Aetherworks Marvel, and green-black delirium. But I actually think that in this field, people are going to shy away from Aetherworks Marvel more than normal. Aetherworks Marvel is probably the most popular deck outside this field, but I think in this field, people don't want to be the deck with the target on its head. Mm-hmm. And furthermore, they like playing more interactive decks that get to make more decisions when the game goes long, and Aetherworks Marvel is not really that type of deck. So I would think that there's going to be a little more blue-white flash and green-black delirium than normal.
All right, well, your deck looks awesome. Tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday, we'll get to see if your predictions are correct. So for Andrew Tenjum, Nick Miller here in the sideboard, stay tuned to StarCityGames.com all weekend long for the action here in Roanoke.